Andrew Carnegie was a Scottish-born industrialist and philanthropist who gave his immense fortune for good reasons. Joseph Fraser Wall, one of Carnegie's most devoted biographers, claims that he gave his money away to justify what he had done to get that money.
Andrew Carnegie's donations, of course, are very kind and generous, so certainly that's a positive, but I suppose the negative is where he got the money to make those donations. Of course, it's through the hard workers of Pittsburgh and the region who sacrificed and often died, making him that money so he could give it away.
Andrew Carnegie was born in Dunfermline, Scotland on November 25, 1835. His father, William, was a weaver who spun looms, and his mother, Mary, worked as a tailor. In 1843, Carnegie and his family immigrated to the United States, as William Carnegie had lost his job as there was a greater demand for machine-made looms than handmade ones. Life was tough for the family, which now included Carnegie's younger brother, Tom, to settle in Pittsburgh. William made tablecloths that he couldn't sell, and the family only got by on the wages Mary earned by tailoring shoes. Finally, Andrew and his father found work in a bobbin factory, making $1.20 a week. Carnegie later found work in a steam engine factory. Later, he became a telegraph messenger boy, and within a year, he became a telegraph operator and assistant to Thomas A. Scott, superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Once, there was a time when Carnegie had been working in his office and 2 trains had crashed and communications were halted. Moreover, Mr. Scott was not there. Carnegie then stepped in his boss's shoes, and by the time Mr. Scott came back, Carnegie had fixed the tracks. Scott was impressed, and later Carnegie overheard Scott bragging about him. Scott called Carnegie a white-haired Scotch devil. Around this time, Carnegie borrowed money to invest in the T.T. Woodruff Sleeping Car Company, which became a huge success. This action would make him earn over $5,000 annually. Around this time, William Carnegie passed away. Though Carnegie was saddened by his death, he continued to work. Eventually, in 1859, Scott was promoted to becoming the vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Carnegie took his former job as the superintendent of the Western Division. Carnegie later settled in Homewood, a neighborhood 15 miles north of Pittsburgh, with his mother and his brother. He became very interested in the arts, for it was a very extravagant community. However, the Civil War broke out in 1861, and Scott was summoned to Washington, D.C., and he called upon Carnegie to help in the war. Carnegie helped construct railroad lines and fix telegraph lines. Carnegie was very impressed by Abraham Lincoln, the president of the time. This is what he had to say about him. All the pictures of this extraordinary man are like him. Intellect shone in his eyes, and he had a kind word for everybody. Same year, Carnegie invested in an Edwin Drake oil company in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and he made a lot of profit. In 1865, Carnegie resigned from the Pennsylvania Railroad. Carnegie realized that wooden bridges, which were often depended on to carry trains, were not very reliable as they caught fire easily, and they must depend on iron bridges. Joining Henry Phipps and the Cloman and Phipps Company, Carnegie produced iron to make bridges for the Pennsylvania Railroad. However, there were sometimes problems with the furnace, and iron would sometimes be too expensive to make. Carnegie then moved to New York City with his mother to expand his business. Then he totaled the amount of capital he was making with his investments, and it came to over $50,000 a year. He later wrote a memo to himself. 33, and I propose to make an income of $50,000 a year. I'll resign business at 35. In spite of this memo, which was found a few years after his death, Carnegie would still be in business for the next 30 years. While on a journey in Europe, Carnegie met Henry Bessemer, inventor of the Bessemer process for making steel. Carnegie was fascinated by the Bessemer process, and he realized that steel would be better to make than iron. When Carnegie returned, he established the Edgar Thomson Works in Pittsburgh. This was named after Edgar Thomson, the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad of that time. Carnegie later invested in Henry Clay Frick's Coke Company in order to make steel. Frick later formed a partnership with him. However, Carnegie had the majority share in Frick's company, and it later led to disagreements between the two.
Frick and Andrew Carnegie, of course, they're business partners, and they joined together very well to make money. Andrew Carnegie, in my view, certainly was maybe a little shrewder of the bunch. He saw Frick needed money and then invested in his coke fields and certainly helped him work out.
In the October of 1886, Carnegie's younger brother, Thomas, passed away. His mother died a month later. Carnegie was crushed. However, he didn't let his sadness get the best of him. Carnegie later got married to Louise Whitfield, a woman whom he had been seeing for some time. The steel industry was doing fine for the next decade, until the Homestead strike. In the Bessemer Steel Works, the workers led a riot. They were being paid a mere $10 for their efforts, which included working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 364 days a year. As Carnegie was in Scotland at the time of the riot, he told Henry Clay Frick to supervise the riot. Frick only made it worse. Finally, there was a fight between the police and the rioters. The strike took its toll. 10 people died and hundreds were injured. This ruined Carnegie's reputation as a fair boss to his workers. This also marked the end of Carnegie's partnership with Henry Clay Frick.
And to have his men working 7 days a week, those long hours, of course, that's highly illegal. In fact, that's why it's illegal today, because of the things, the conditions that existed in his mills. The long hours, the horrible conditions, the poor pay, absolutely, no question about that.
He later bore a daughter by the name of Margaret. At the same time, he bought a castle in Scotland by the name of Skibo Castle at his wife's request. This would later be their home. In 1901, Carnegie was considering retirement. He then sold his steel empire to J.P. Morgan, a banker, for $350 million. This action would make him the richest man in the world. Carnegie died on August 11, 1919. He is buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in New York. Carnegie spent the last 20 years of his life engaged in philanthropy, and he gave his money to schools, libraries, and other things around the world. In fact, by the time he had died, he had given most of his money away. He funded the expedition to find the Diplodocus dinosaur. As a result, the dinosaur's scientific name, Diplodocus carnegie, is named after him. Carnegie was well known for his writings. He published many writings throughout his life, such as his autobiography, letters, and his famous book, The Gospel of Wealth. He will also be remembered for these as well. He even formed the Carnegie Hero Fund, an organization that recognizes people who have done heroic things. This organization is still going strong. Therefore, Carnegie influenced many people around the world. His generosity will never be forgotten.